Hi there, I'm Steve. The article I'm about to read comes from Wikipedia and is available under the Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike license. You can find the full article at en.wikipedia.org/wiki/fort_Farnsworth and learn more about the license at creativecommons.org/licenses/by-sa/4.0. Wikipedia is a registered trademark of the Wikimedia Foundation, and this channel is not affiliated with or endorsed by them. Today's article is Fort Farnsworth. Fort Farnsworth is a former Union Army installation now located in the Huntington area of Fairfax County, Virginia. It was a timber and earthwork fortification constructed south of Alexandria, Virginia, as part of the defenses of Washington, D.C. during the American Civil War. Nothing survives of the fort's structure, as the Huntington station of the Washington Metro occupies the former Fort Farnsworth hilltop site. Occupation of Arlington. Before the outbreak of the Civil War, Alexandria County, renamed Arlington County in 1920, the Virginia county closest to Washington, D.C., was a predominantly rural area. Originally part of the District of Columbia, the land now comprising the county was retroceded to Virginia in a July 9, 1846 Act of Congress that took effect in 1847. Most of the county is hilly, and at the time, most of the county's population was concentrated in the city of Alexandria, at the far southeastern corner of the county. In 1861, the rest of the county largely consisted of scattered farms, the occasional house, fields for grazing livestock, and Arlington House, owned by Mary Custis, wife of Robert E. Lee. Following the surrender of Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina on April 14, 1861, the new American president, Abraham Lincoln, declared that, quote, an insurrection existed, end quote, and called for 75,000 troops to be called up to squash the rebellion. The move sparked resentment in many other southern states, which promptly moved to convene discussions of secession. The Virginia State Convention passed an Ordinance of Secession and ordered a May 23rd referendum to decide whether or not the state should secede from the Union. The U.S. Army responded, creating the Department of Washington, which united all Union troops in the District of Columbia and Maryland under one command. Brigadier General Joseph K. Mansfield, commander of the Department of Washington, argued that Northern Virginia should be occupied as soon as possible in order to prevent the possibility of the Confederate Army mounting artillery on the hills of Arlington and shelling government buildings in Washington. He also urged the erection of fortifications on the Virginia side of the Potomac River to protect the southern terminuses of the Chain Bridge, Long Bridge, and Aqueduct Bridge. His superiors approved these recommendations, but decided to wait until after Virginia voted for or against secession. On May 23, 1861, Virginia voted by a margin of 3-1 in favor of leaving the Union. That night, U.S. Army troops began crossing the bridges linking Washington, D.C. to Virginia. The march, which began at 10 p.m. on the night of the 23rd, was described in colorful terms by the New York Herald 2 days later. There can be no more complaints of inactivity of the government. The forward march movement into Virginia, indicated in my dispatches last night, took place at the precise time this morning that I named, but in much more imposing and powerful numbers. About 10 o'clock last night, 4 companies of picked men moved over the Long Bridge as an advance guard. They were sent to reconnoiter, and if assailed, were ordered to signal when they would have been reinforced by a corps of regular infantry and a battery. At 12 o'clock, the infantry regiment, artillery, and cavalry corps began to muster and assume marching order. As fast as the several regiments were ready, they proceeded to the Long Bridge, those in Washington being directed to take that route. The troops quartered at Georgetown, the 69th, 5th, 8th, and 28th New York regiments proceeded across what is known as the Chain Bridge, above the mouth of the Potomac Aqueduct, under the command of General McDowell. They took possessions of the heights in that direction. The imposing scene was at the Long Bridge, where the main body of the troops crossed. 8,000 infantry, 2 regular cavalry companies, and 2 sections of Sherman's artillery battalion, consisting of 2 batteries, were in line this side of the Long Bridge at 2 o'clock. The occupation of Northern Virginia was peaceful, with the sole exception of Alexandria. There, as Colonel Elmer E. Ellsworth, commander of the New York Fire Zouaves, entered a local hotel to remove the Confederate flag flying above it, he was shot and killed by James Jackson, the proprietor. Ellsworth was one of the first men killed in the American Civil War. Throughout the remainder of the war, Alexandria would lean strongly towards the Confederate government, necessitating continued occupation by a Union garrison. The Battle of Bull Run. Over the 7 weeks that followed the occupation of Northern Virginia, forts were constructed along the banks of the Potomac River and at the approaches to each of the 3 major bridges, that is, the Chain Bridge, Long Bridge, and Aqueduct Bridge, connecting Virginia to Washington and Georgetown. While the Potomac River forts were being built, planning and surveying was ordered for an enormous new ring of forts to protect the city. Unlike the fortifications under construction, the new forts would defend the city in all directions, not just the most direct route through Arlington. In mid-July, this work was interrupted by the First Battle of Bull Run. As the Army of Northeastern Virginia marched south to Manassas, the soldiers previously assigned to construction duties marched instead to battle. In the days that followed the Union defeat at Bull Run, panicked efforts were made to defend Washington from what was perceived as an imminent Confederate attack. The makeshift trenches and earthworks that resulted were largely confined to Arlington and the direct approaches to Washington. On July 26, 1861, 5 days after the battle, Major General George B. McClellan was named commander of the Military District of Washington and the subsequently renamed Army of the Potomac. Upon arriving in Washington, McClellan was appalled by the condition of the city's defenses. He wrote, "In no quarter were the dispositions for defenses such as to offer a vigorous resistance to a respectable body of the enemy, either in the position and numbers of the troops or the number and character of the defensive works. Not a single defensive work had been commenced on the Maryland side. There was nothing to prevent the enemy shelling the city from heights within easy range, which could be occupied by a hostile column almost without resistance." To remedy the situation, one of McClellan's first orders upon taking command was to greatly expand the defenses of Washington. At all points of the compass, forts and entrenchments would be constructed in sufficient strength to defeat any attack. Alexandria, which contained the southern terminus of the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal and one of the largest ports in the Chesapeake Bay, was an object of anxious study. If you've liked this video and want to hear more, please give it a like and subscribe. Thanks for listening.